And today on the show, I'm delighted to be joined by two guests, Clare Cassano, the head of Procurement Strategy and Execution at global investment management firm Invesco, and Toby LaForest, Senior Director of Market Insights and Solutions at Ironclad, a leading AI contract lifecycle management platform. Now, today's show, we're going to be discussing Invesco's procurement transformation journey and also the considerations that they gave when building the tech stack that enabled the new operating model. So with that said, Clare, Toby, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us.
Now, I always start with the same question, and Clare, I'm going to direct this to you
Okay.
first. That is, did you find procurement or did procurement find you?
I think it was a little bit of both.
Okay.
My background is not procurement. My background is operations
Mhm.
in high stakes assessment. And I was asked to join the procurement team at the point where my organisation had outsourced it. So I was
Okay.
the conduit between procurement and the rest of the organisation.
Yeah.
Long story short, I went off on maternity leave and I came back and we decided to insource procurement again. And I thought, maybe I don't have a job at all. But they kept me around. So I had the benefit of kind of seeing a procurement team being built from scratch and got to
Yeah.
do a little bit of everything. So that was my baptism of fire into the world of procurement.
Interesting. I had I've been in similar experiences where I've outsourced procurement and been the conduit as well. And also actually been on the provider side where I've been the service provider that's been in an outsourced procurement organization, and definitely pros and cons of doing both models. And it just so much goes down to how you set it up and the cultural fit and things like that.
Absolutely.
Because
Absolutely.
you can bring in the wrong categories of spend and it's a disaster from the first minute. And it's got to be really, you got to be really agile as well, I found, to make it work.
Yeah. For sure. Well, I wasn't really around for what happened during that period. I just came back afterwards and found myself in the world of procurement fully. So yes.
Well, welcome, into procurement. It's funny that that's how most guests, we all find procurement. I asked the question, but 99% of us find ourselves in it in some way, shape, or form. Toby, I know you come from a slightly different perspective. I'm not sure if the question is quite so relevant, but why don't you talk a little bit about how you found yourself in this world of contracts and ultimately liaising with supporting, colleagues in procurement?
Yeah, for sure. Claire stole my answer there of a little bit of both. I joined Ironclad to work on the problem of contracts, working in technology for a while now. I've always had that kind of struggle with contracts or this back and forth of, this is weighing me down, but it's so important. So I said, all right, I want to go and solve that problem. I think I underestimated how much this would pull me to the procurement side. So there are different types of contracts and I was focused on others, but so buy side or procurement wasn't kind of top of mind when I joined the company, but I've fallen in love with procurement over the last couple of years and have done a ton of speaking and visiting trade shows about procurement. And it's such a fascinating use case for contracts that I guess it's found me along the way.
Yeah, contracting is obviously such a big part of what we do. And what probably one of our greatest challenges and struggles, certainly over my time as a practitioner was access of contracts, finding information in contracts, how long it takes to contract, and what that does to cycle times. So definitely something that is right front and center of what we challenge or what we face. The challenges we face as a procurement professional. Claire, if I can talk a little bit about kind of the journey that you've been on, could you share a little bit about kind of the transformation journey at Invesco and, kind of how you perhaps where you started, how you decided, what, we want to try and look at doing something a little bit different, and then the journey that you went on to do that.
Yeah, sure. So I guess the transformation began sort of two years ago when our Chief Procurement Officer, Al Williams, joined Invesco, and then I followed him soon afterwards. And we were in the great position of having a very clear mandate to really bring procurement back to the forefront for Invesco and to ensure that we had a seat at the table and we're helping to drive strategy. So there was a very clear kind of mandate from ELT for procurement to expand, grow, and take more ownership, which is a great position to be in. And where we started, we had some really highly skilled people in the team, but I just don't think we were leveraging that skill in the best possible way. We were a very reactive rather than proactive team. We were very responsive to the good corporate citizens that would come and ask for procurement support, and then try to do our best with those individuals within the organization that didn't know any better, and try to help kind of at the back end of the process to make things as perfect as they possibly could be. So we knew we had to change our operating model. We did that. So we had essentially a category agnostic sourcing team, and we moved them into a category structure. We partnered them with very clear business stakeholders that held most of the purse strings across the organization, and ensured that procurement had a seat at the table as they were building their multi-year strategies and thinking about what Invesco was going to be investing in moving forwards over the course of the next few years. In terms of, so that's kind of the people side. In terms of process, I think our biggest kind of challenge was that we didn't have a clear front door for our users across the business to obtain procurement support. So that was a real challenge and a problem that we needed to solve pretty quickly. And then we had kind of a mismatch of technology, I guess. We had very little in the way of procurement technology when I joined just under 2 years ago. We had no sourcing tool. We had a contract repository which had loads of contracts in it, which was wonderful, and I've never experienced that before. But it was just that, it was a repository. We had our PO process, we had a supplier risk process, but we had very little in between. And what we wanted to be able to do was more without having to add huge numbers of additional people into the procurement team. The organization was very happy to invest for us to get to where we needed to be, but we needed to be really careful about how we made that investment. So technology was kind of primary. Some key kind of hires of human beings was important as well to supplement what we already had and to support that technology transformation. But that was predominantly where we focused.
One of the follow-up questions I had that you kind of went into a little bit about when you talked about no kind of procurement front door, but I was interested as you shift from that sourcing to a category management with structure, how you started to get early involvement, because obviously that's really key as you started to build up relationships, is getting early involvement at the category level. Was that a technology solution? Was it a people solution? Like, how did you start to get ahead of things rather than being that reactive or more reactive sourcing group?
It was a people solution at first. So it was very much about lifting up those members of the sourcing team that took on those category roles. It was about getting them in front of the right people. It was about senior leadership, communication, and sharing of what it was that we were trying to achieve and how we were able to help them. So it was very, very people-centric, certainly to begin with. And we were able to kick that off right at the get-go as part of that transformation. As we have gone through our digital transformation and implemented some of our new tools, we've tackled the kind of high-level key stakeholders. Now we get to look at the mid kind of spend and even some of the tail spend area. So it becomes a much more holistic and complete picture. So people first, and then technology drives the rest of the. Yes.
I was really interested the comment that you talked about, because I'm a firm believer in this. When it comes to procurement transformation, oftentimes what happens is new leadership comes in, and without really much consideration, the perspective is, old is bad, new is good. And so there's a huge, big kind of transformation, including people and everything. I'm a big believer that oftentimes, like you just said, it's often that the team haven't had the tools at their disposal. They may not have had the leadership. They have not been shown, what great looks like. And so that's kind of always my first approach, is how can you make small changes that make big differences? It was just interesting to me that that was where you ended up in terms of the transformation journey. Was not necessarily huge, big change, but it's, okay, let's see how we can just help the team that we've already got, because we know that it's a really good team.
Absolutely. And it's being able to identify what are the unique problem statements with this particular organization that we need to solve for. So my previous experience at previous organizations, supplier onboarding took way too long. There wasn't enough compliance spend going on a PO. Those weren't the challenges that we had in Invesco. As I say, we had a really strong team that were in place. It was then, well, what is the problem statement? And there were areas of spend that procurement didn't really have line of sight to, almost until it was too late. So that became our focal point in order to be able to address the need.
Were there any external factors that kind of drove the value proposition that you wanted procurement to drive for Invesco?
Yeah, look, I mean, Invesco is like many organizations is impacted by external market conditions.
Yeah.
So it's a great thing that this is an organization that is forward thinking and forward planning with all of the kind of market volatility that's been
Mm.
going on over the last few months. That it's thinking about, well, where do we have complete control and what do we have complete control over in order to be able to, you know, drive up our operating margins.
Yeah.
And so procurement is just one part of that, of course, but that was where the kind of renewed interest, I guess, came from was what are all the factors that we have complete control of? How do we ensure that these are in tip-top kind of working order to
Mhm.
ensure that our continued success into the future?
Now, because you had that support from the executive leadership team, did you find that that was a good conduit then to work with individual stakeholders? There wasn't as much of a sell because you had that support, or was there still a big sell that you had to make to stakeholders about this is a new model and this is kind of the updated role, if you will, that procurement would like to play within support you and your organization?
Yeah, I think it certainly helps with the overarching. Sometimes we use the phrase North Star. I'm not a massive fan
Yeah.
of it, but it's the one that comes to mind. So,
Mhm.
the overarching, what is it that we're aiming for? I think the organization can completely agree that um, having more good guardrails in place, having more spend controls in place, provided that they're well executed and don't slow the business down,
Yeah.
is a positive thing.
Yeah.
It helps our organization to be as successful as it possibly can be. There is still a sell for certain elements of what you're doing. When you
Yeah.
start changing the operating model of a team, you are changing roles and responsibilities, not just within the team, but how that team interacts with other teams. And when you're introducing new technologies where there is some overlapping
Mhm.
capability between those new technologies and existing ones, there is a push pull as you work through, or what is the right answer as to how we configure these technologies together to ensure that we get to the right outcome. So, yes, at the top level, there is still work to do, with the boots on the ground, as it were, and the decision makers, at the more granular level.
Well, I want to bring Toby in just to talk. We talked a little bit about external market dynamics and how those kind of change priorities. And I know from a contracting perspective, that was something that was always really difficult for me. Was you have a change in market conditions, you have an event that happens. That's all well and good, but you don't necessarily have the agility to go and do anything about it because you don't know the impact, you don't have the optionality, or you don't understand where that is. I wonder if you could talk a little bit about, kind of what you see in terms of the role that contracts play in that agility to um, adapt and just quickly as market conditions externally change.
Yeah, the role of contracts is there to help you understand your company's position as those market changes occur. So when there's a shock, something changes, right? None of us anticipate when these external factors happen. The contracts that your company has can be a guiding light to say, okay, what is the impact of this change here? Actually, how much pressure do we have on now? Or are we in a really good place to actually use this market change to our advantage? How do we kind of navigate this in a positive way and a proactive way instead of a reactive way? So, of course, you need the right technology. I think Claire has said that there is like you need the right people, you need the right technology. They need to both work together to be able to say, okay, how can we leverage this technology to navigate this? But your contracts are your source of truth. And so if
Yeah.
you have a tool that can go through the contracts and help you understand the impact and make an assessment, you have it all in one place. Especially, Claire, it's very rare that you had a contract repository in place when you joined. But
Mm.
you have all your contracts in one place, then yeah, you can query them, you can ask, you can use AI to understand, and very quickly you can get an answer instead of going through 6 different systems and piecing it all together. That's your source of truth.
So how practically, I'm thinking about contracts being something that you can use proactively rather than reactively. Proactively to either scenario plan or to move quickly when something happens versus reactive. Something's happened and I need to spend the next 3 months collecting everything, and I've done that. I've been in a financial services company where I've had to spend the next 9 months, figuring out what terms and clauses exist because regulatory changes are happening. Could you kind of give an example of how do you query the AI and how do you use AI, for example,
Yeah.
to get more of a proactive view into what either what risks exist, how certain changes might affect or drive your strategy around your suppliers. I'd love to just get kind of real world examples.
Yeah. So all the questions you just said, right, are essentially AI prompts.
Yeah.
And so I can go and save AI prompts. I can ask a question like, how does this contract define XYZ situation? And I can save that prompt and run that prompt for every single document that I have in my repository.
Mhm.
So now instead of sending someone to read or extract data, or this happens all the time where like when the contract is created, I didn't collect all of the information that I'll need for the rest of the duration of that contract. Something may happen and I need to see the data in a different way. So
Yeah.
I can save an AI prompt. You can do things as to ask the question of flat out, tariffs are now a factor in here. How does this contract define tariffs, and how do tariff change and regulation affect this contract?
Mhm.
And AI will go out and in a very structured way answer that question on every single contract of yours. So then you have the data, and you can go and analyze that data, and you have a report that's much easier to understand. But I also think there's that in terms of, okay, something just happened. Let me understand the
Yeah.
impact. But then when something also happens, that fundamentally will change your process for the next contracts forever. And
Mhm.
so AI can be in that situation as well as your category managers or your sourcing team is working on a new order or a new contract. They also can use AI to say, okay, here the market conditions have changed. How would you modify this document? And AI can be used as a as kind of a thought partner there.
Yeah.
One company I'm working with right now is, I think there's always a dynamic between legal and procurement teams. And so they're leveraging AI to get fast legal answers that they can rely on to do the work they need. That doesn't mean they're avoiding legal completely, but there's a smaller question or a quick answer, or an interpretation that AI can solve without having to loop in the
Mhm.
legal team. So there's tons of different ways.
Interesting. From a procurement perspective, Claire, do you feel like, I know that risk is a key factor with you being in financial services and in a regulated environment. Does the ability to have access to more information and insights at a contract level drive the value proposition that you have, with the rest of the business for managing risk and being seen as somebody who is again, a proactive manager of risk rather than somebody to go to ask for some information, but really it's up to the risk committees over here and all these other things, and you're just kind of a conduit in that process.
Well, look, I think procurement has always been the kind of the first line of defense for
Yeah.
third party risk through the kind of supplier screening process. The benefit that tools like Ironclad bring, and surprise, surprise, Ironclad is one of the solutions that we've implemented at Invesco. The benefits that brings is that actually you can do that retrospective review. You can do that proactive review. So as you're coming to renew contracts, we have had recently, AI agents coming out of our ears at
Mhm.
every possible kind of place, and we have been proactively shoring up our contractual terms and conditions
Yeah.
to ensure that our suppliers are doing that in a way that we are comfortable with.
Yeah.
So we're able to now utilize some of the reporting functionality to be able to identify, okay, which of these suppliers have this clause already, which of these suppliers don't. So it allows us to be much more proactive.
Mhm.
In managing or pre-managing some of
Right.
those risks before they become real risks.
When you started, I want to talk a little bit more about your tech stack and how you kind of went from where you were at the beginning of the transformation journey, which you said you had technology solutions that were all kind of a bit disparate, didn't really talk to each other. They missed key gaps in the continuum. When you kind of sat down and looked at what you had versus where you wanted to go, what were some of the considerations in, what these are the segments of tools that we should really start focusing on first?
So when I joined Invesco, we were looking at everything. We were
Yeah.
looking at end-to-end suites. We were also looking at kind of best of breed endpoint solutions. So we were looking at the full combination. What I knew was that we were not going to touch our supplier risk
Yep.
management tool. Everybody was happy with it, didn't want to do away with it,
Yep.
and we were not going to touch Oracle as our kind of PO creation tool.
Yeah.
So I knew I was going to have a challenge right from the get-go in terms of integrations, and making sure that those tools would be able to speak to each other, which, to your point, they absolutely did not. It's
Mhm.
human intervention that got one thing through to the other
The amount
two.
of times you have processes that end in one tool and you got to do something manually to input all the information into a second tool to kick off, the
That's
PO
right.
process, for example.
That's right. So that was the kind of first
Yeah.
consideration. The other was that, at the time that we were looking a year and a half to 2 years ago, a lot of the endpoint solutions, when you look at them versus the modules of the end-to-end
Yeah.
suites, I mean, there are huge differences between the capabilities of the endpoint solutions but versus the large suite. So we were very much looking at this as not, oh, I want best of breed. We were looking at what is the best fit for
Yeah.
Invesco. The other part that played into the decision making about our tech stack was our ecosystem, our entire kind of ecosystem
Mhm.
of procure to pay type tools. We buy some very niche things at Invesco, that niche for kind of financial
Right.
services, just as when I was working in consulting, we bought niche things, and when I was working in education, we bought niche things. And typically, you have a very specific tool that manages the purchase of those very niche things in a very, very effective way. And the challenge with endpoint solutions, of course, is it's a kind of one size fits all. I know they like to suggest that it
Yeah.
can do more, but truthfully, it's a one size fits all. So when you make a decision to put an when you make a decision to put an end-to-end suite in, you are making a decision to exclude certain pockets of spend for your organization,
Yeah.
probably forever or for as long as you're going to be around for. And that's painful. We want an enterprise view of spend. Are we there yet? Absolutely not. Do we have the foundations to be able to get there? We absolutely do. And it was for those reasons that we landed on endpoint solution and best fit for us for contract lifecycle management,
Yeah.
best fit solution for sourcing, and an orchestration layer in order to be able to join up all of the parts that we were implementing as part of our first phase, but with also line of sight to these niche products that we're using and operating and don't want to do away with at Invesco, the opportunity to join to those so that we can create this ultimate enterprise level view of all of our third party
Yeah.
purchasing. So we've got a little bit of a way to go yet. It's not an overnight wave a magic wand and it's all there, but I am confident that we've got the foundations to be able to get there.
So it's interesting when you were talking about kind of the approach to, endpoint solutions was how do you connect the dots? And then you kind of talked about the orchestration layer. Is the orchestration layer, what is enabling you to then go and buy and implement fit for purpose technology that meets very specific use cases in a way that still kind of, one, ensures that data flows, but two, that as a user, you don't necessarily see all the different tools in the background because the orchestration layer is kind of a level of protection in front of it. So it makes it easier to use.
That is exactly the approach that we've taken. The end user, I talked about the kind of core problem statement earlier, and our core problem statement was people don't know how to engage procurement when they need them, and they don't necessarily know when they need
Yeah.
procurement. So we had to solve that problem. So our orchestration layer gives us intake, and then our orchestration layer gives us all of the connectivity between all of our solutions and end-to-end workflows, some of which happens concurrently, some of it which happens but based on triggers that happen earlier. But the added layer here is you are right. Our end users don't have to go into Ironclad procurement, do all of that, and work with legal and the various other teams that review contracts. Our end users don't have to go into Ironclad, but from Zip is the
Yeah.
orchestration layer that we've used, they can see exactly the status of their contract creation. They can right down to at the point of signature who has signed and who hasn't signed. So if Invesco is ready to sign, but the third party isn't, they can go and chase that up. They can see all of that through that single window. So those were all the kind of selling points, I guess, and problems that we were able to solve with orchestration. Visibility end to end, the
Yeah.
join up, not just for our end users, but also for procurement, who historically they got that visibility by sending each other emails
I
all
know,
day,
right?
every day, and
Yeah.
checking where everything was.
Basically end up being the post box for everybody and the
Absolutely.
apologizer for
And the
all your
apologies.
stakeholders.
Yes.
Um, do you find that stakeholder visibility, because we typically, we're a black box and nobody really knows where anything is. So we are, as we talked about, everyone always comes to procurement to ask where it is, and procurement gets a bad rep, wherever something sits. Have you found that enabling that visibility has changed the relationship with stakeholders, or has
Yeah, I
given them
mean,
more insight into what the process really looks like?
yes, and I think we're still relatively early days. I know we've been kind of working through this transformation over the course of 2 years, but we're only just live really to our largest markets. I think the early feedback that we've had is that our end users really appreciate the visibility. I think our teams also, where the transaction is at any given time, and also you get helpful little chasers from all of the solutions when you haven't addressed something
Yeah.
for a couple of days, which certainly doesn't hurt. I think the interesting part is the interest that we've had from other bits of the organization, and typically risk teams and tax teams and all of those sorts of groups who have been blind to or have had to jump through lots and lots of hoops in order to be able to get information, contract information. And now we can invite them into our ecosystem and share key bits of information with them. So we've definitely seen a positive kind of initial
Mhm.
response. And I am, again, confident that that will continue.
Toby, I'm sure you're involved in a lot of conversations with prospects about, do we go the best of breed route? Do we go suite route? What kind of factors do you usually see that kind of play into their decision-making process when it comes to making that kind of sourcing decision?
Yeah, integrations, right, is top of mind. How
Yes.
easy, if I go the best of breed, is it gonna be something that I can easily connect the dots?
Yeah.
I think there's a false premise that when you do an end-to-end suite, all of those modules within that suite are also fully connected. There's a lot of times where they're not fully connected. So integrations, whether you go one way or the other, is something you're going to have to solve. And we fully endorse the direction Claire and team have gone. An orchestration layer and intake tools can be wildly helpful to connect the dots and just create one lane for everybody to connect to. So integrations is a huge factor there. I think agility is something that needs to be talked about, or is a priority of how fast do you want the organization to move. When we were chatting with Claire, she said the you shared, well, this setup allows me to remove tools also when they're not the best of breed anymore. And hopefully, Ironclad, we will always be the best of breed there. But I think that's a great point as well. I talk to so many um, buyers, but also people who want to buy and can't because they're locked in at the end to end.
Yeah.
They've invested so much. They're with this company for so long that then plugging in one piece that's better in one area is way too much work. So you have to stay there. So I think just agility and freedom to make decisions, make choices, make changes when your process needs. Claire, I love what you're talking about of like not using a one size fits all solution of like, here are the things that were a struggle at the previous company. That doesn't mean they're the same challenge here. And so I think there's so much variety in procurement systems and procurement teams and what they work on, that then one size fits all will never work. Everybody is a special flower. Everybody needs something unique and niche. And again, kind of going in or understanding what your truly unique features are and where you're going to need to step out of the status quo and do something different. That's really important to
Yeah.
discuss that upfront and understand, okay, how does that work in this ecosystem? What is it going to allow us to do if we have to pivot and focus on something else? So yeah, I think just the overall program agility and ability to adapt is something that has to be prioritized in that discussion.
Something that I think is important to reiterate, earlier in my career, I would look and think that when people told me, well, my organization's different and there's something is unique and things, I'd look at that and think, you know what? That's an excuse to resist change. And then you kind of go through a few transformations and you mature and you realize that we shouldn't necessarily be in pursuit of so-called best in class. It's as Claire, you said, best fit. What's going to work for my organization and the culture that I'm in, and all the different things that do make my organization unique. And best in class can be, an interesting, point of discussion of what other organizations are doing that are successful. but it's not necessarily something to pursue on its own. It really is, how can I be, support my organization in the best way that they will respond and react to. Um, I think it's important to kind of to reference that. Toby, one last thing I did have a question about, because we talked about orchestration. You know, on one hand, I look at orchestration. So I'm really interested from your perspective as a provider. You know, do you look at orchestration as this delayers me a little bit, so I'm kind of one less layer removed from being able to impact and influence adoption and usage and things like that, or this is truly a way for us to be integrated into the tech stack in a much more holistic way, so that people can get more use out of and more benefit from using what we have?
Yeah, it's the latter. Like our chief product officer and I have talked about, in the future, 90% of Ironclad users may never know that they've logged into Ironclad. We're very okay with a bunch of people not knowing that their contract is powered by Ironclad, as long as it gets the job done and like serves the need of the business. There's so many tools. There's so many different things, new agents, new things popping up that we don't want to be one other tool that the whole team has to learn. Again, we a lot of our interactions are done just via email or via Slack or in the tools, Salesforce integration just there. So we're very focused on an integrated contracting experience and kind of being the back end that powers the contracts. And there can be a million other front doors for the contract that we believe that actually gets the result done and transforms your contracting.
Interesting. Yeah, so it's definitely the direction of travel. And so many organizations I talk to, if they haven't implemented an orchestration layer, they are actively looking at it. So I was just interested in kind of your perspective on where that sits for you. Now, I know it's about time to wrap up, Claire. I'm going to put you a little bit on the spot with one last question.
Okay.
And just ask you kind of what's next. You know, as you're looking to continue to evolve, grow, transform the team, is there any areas? Is it, let's get what we're doing right now working, and then we kind of move on to the next stage? Or have you kind of got a little bit of a roadmap that says, okay, the next leg of our journey is X?
Yeah. So we do have a little bit of a roadmap. We have, starting from a position with very little process, we've got loads of opportunity with what we have built out so far. So improving our buying channels, putting in, all the basic stuff, putting in kind of preferred supplier workflows, so that ultimately we make the journey for our end user as seamless and easy as possible. I want to make it impossible for them to do the wrong thing, because all of the guardrails don't feel like guardrails. They just feel like happy guidance.
Yeah.
So we've got a whole load of work to do to kind of leverage. It's the partnership between the category teams and us as the kind of technical digital enablers to work together to build all of that out. But beyond that, I have a list of these niche solutions I talked about earlier that have a relatively large proportion of spend going through them.
Yeah.
I want to look at how we implement and integrate those and what the right user journeys are to build all of those in. And then beyond that, because I always think that far, I don't always think that far ahead, but I'm thinking that far ahead at the moment. What are the possibilities with orchestration are essentially endless, right? So what are all the other things that we do at Invesco that starts with a purchase? So things like hardware and software asset management, that starts with a purchase. There's key data points that we capture through the contracting process and the purchasing process. How do we pass that data through to our hardware and software asset management tools in order to be able to capture that and have that kind of end to end? Everything that starts with the purchase has a link to that purchase, and we can see the audit trail from beginning to end. So I think I've got a few years' work on my hands for sure.
All the things that we've dreamed of for years to be able to do in procurement, I feel, you're talking about what was the promise of guided buying that never really came to pass, that is now possible by all these very specific user journeys. And the and by getting those right, that gives us permission to work on the things that are more strategic to the business, because you're making the process for everything else as painless as possible, but in a way that still means that, we have a little bit of control under the hood. It's just that the stakeholders don't necessarily see that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I suppose the other piece is really around this current kind of growth in agentic AI and the agents that, I mean, they're coming from all angles. It's that, which are the ones that we need, which are the ones that are going to solve our problems? How do we go about implementing them in this environment where we've got technologies layered over the top of each other?
Yep.
We're talking a lot about agents at the moment.
Yeah.
I'm really interested in the practical application of
Yeah.
those agents and how they work together across multiple solutions. So that's the stuff that I'm really excited about.
Yeah. It feels like there's almost like, not there's too many, because there will be more. Whatever there is today, there'll be a lot more tomorrow. But it's figuring out, okay, which ones are really going to add value, or which ones do we have true challenges to solve for that an agent will help us with, as opposed to trying everything. Because I know I've struggled with that,
Mm.
mightily. I'll sign up for all kinds of agents because it seems like a great idea, and then
Yeah.
you end up with pushing 10 boulders uphill all at the same time, trying to get them to work. So
Yeah, exactly.
There's a lot of agents out there that aren't actually agents. They're not
Right.
really agentic in any way. And so there's so much noise to cut through to actually find that set of agents and then find which are the useful ones. So yeah.
Agreed.
But fun and exciting. To try and figure all this out. I want to thank you so much, Claire and Toby, for joining me on the podcast. What I'll do is, if anybody would like to reach out and connect directly, I'll put links to your LinkedIn profiles in the show notes for today's episode for anyone who's listening or watching in. Those are always at artofprocurement.com/podcast. That's artofprocurement.com/podcast. You'll see this episode there. So with that said, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
Thank you.